Okay. All right. Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. Okay, so I have three things that I want to talk about, and I probably will not get to all of them. So let's start off with one. Talk a little bit about Sphira, about the counting of the Omer, and then from there, segue into the Parsha. That we know that when we count the Omer, today is the first day, the second day, the third day, we count up towards the giving of the Torah. Really, the whole concept of the counting is that the reason why it's called Sfiras HaOmer is that the Torah tells us that we should take a measure of grain and sacrifice it on the second day of Pesach. And that sacrifice that we make on the second day of Pesach now allows us to be able to use all of the grain that grew up until that point. That grain that grew up until that point, since last Pesach, up until the second day of Pesach, that grain is now called Yashan. That's the old grain, which you're allowed to use. And the Chadash, which is anything that grows or roots from the second day of Pesach on, that is not permissible until next year Pesach. And therefore, that moment of where things become permissible, where the grains become permissible, that is on the second day of Pesach. From that offering, we're then meant to count 49 days until the giving of the Torah. Now, one of the reasons that the Torah doesn't tell us when Shavuos happens, the Torah tells us it happens 50 days after the second day of Pesach, after the beginning of this first offering. So that's why it's called Sfiras HaOmer, because it's called the Omer offering. So the Omer means a measure. So it's an Omer offering, and then we count from that Omer offering until Shavuos. And why are we linking Pesach and Shavuos? Because the whole purpose of coming out of Mitzrayim was to get the Torah. The coming out of Mitzrayim wasn't for coming out of Mitzrayim. God could have done anything to get us out of Mitzrayim. He could have just made Mitzrayim melt away. But the fact that that we were to get the Torah, that was really the end of the giving of that was the end of the Exodus of Egypt. And therefore, those two events are inextricably linked to each other, because we have to recognize that the leaving of Egypt was not the essence. It wasn't the end. It was really just a means to the end. And the end was to be able to give the Jewish people the Torah. So in preparation for the Torah, we count every day. But it's a little odd that we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We could easily count there are 49 days left, 48 days left, 47 days left, right? Also building in anticipation. If the purpose is to build in anticipation for the giving of the Torah, you could do it that way also. Then why dafka do we do it this way? Of today is 1 day, today is 2 days, 3 days, 1 week, and 1 day, 1 week, and 2 days. Why are we counting up towards the giving of the Torah in that way? To answer this, we have to look at something very different. We have to take a look at at Yaakov Avinu. When Yaakov came into to Haran, and he met his uncle, and then he met his beloved, he met Rachel and Leah. At that moment, he decided that Rachel was going to be his mate. And with Rachel, he was going to be able to build this world that God wanted him to build. He offers Lavan 7 years to work for Rachel, and Lavan accepts the offer. Now, if you're making any kind of negotiation, you don't start on the top of a negotiation. You don't start with the last number you're willing to give. You start with the lowest, and then they'll put up a number, you'll put up a number, they'll put up a number, and somewhere you'll end up in the middle. Yaakov Avinu offers 7 years of work, which is like $1 billion. Why would he have offered that much money for Rachel and not even negotiate? And nobody was asking him to do it. That's problem number one. Problem number two, it says that to work for Rachel, it was like Yomim Achadim. Yamim Achadim means like 1 day. In other words, the time flew. Now, you know that when you set a goal in your mind to get somewhere, to do something, the time doesn't fly. The time schleps. When you know that in a week you're going to be going on a big trip, so then it just schleps until you get to that moment. Time doesn't fly. So how could it be true that 7 years was like Yomim Achadim? It was like one day, that it went very quickly. That's the exact opposite of natural teva, of the nature of a person. So how could that be true by Yaakov? We know also that when Yaakov finally wanted to break from Lavan and he wanted to leave, he went to his wives and he said to them, he was hemming and hawing because he was afraid. Look, taking two sisters away from their father, away from their family, away from everything they know, it can't be a good thing. So he was hemming and hawing, trying to set the stage. And basically what they said to him was, what took you so long? Why didn't you come up with this idea to leave long ago? We were ready to leave. We want out of here. Our father doesn't care about us. All our father wants from us is to make him money. Our father looked at us as being, dowry points that he could get stuff from anybody who married us. That's the way he saw us. We don't want a beer. We want out. What is that all about? So I think that what we have to understand is that Yaakov Avinu understood the relationship between Lavan and Rachel immediately. And Yaakov Avinu understood that Lavan saw no value in Rachel. He didn't love Rachel for who Rachel was. He didn't see her for being the person that she was. And that Rachel's self-esteem, Rachel's vision of herself, was knocked down into the ground. Yaakov Avinu offered a top dollar offer because he needed Rachel to believe in herself. And therefore, if he offered something which was so huge and abnormal, all Rachel would be able to think is, wow, he really thinks I'm something special. He really thinks that I'm something great. And it would build her up to the extent that she could then accomplish the amazing things that he knew that she would be able to accomplish. 20 some odd years later, when he said to her, I want out of here, she said to him, my father only makes me feel like a nothing. Why would I want to stay here? Yaakov Avinu was 100% correct in his assessment that he knew that if he was going to be able to build a family, going to be able to build a tribe, was going to be able to build a nation from Rachel, he needed her to feel incredible about herself and to feel comfortable with who she was so that she could then step outside of herself to be able to build this nation. That's why it went ki yomim achadim. Because every single day that Yaakov Avinu was working, he was doing something purposeful. You see, when you're a goal-oriented person, when you're living towards the end, towards the goal, so then the goals are important. Getting to those goals are just means to the end. And the way you get there almost doesn't matter as long as you reach that goal. But when you look at every step of the way that you take as being valuable, and that it's not just about getting to the goal, but it's how you get to that goal. If you set a date in your mind that this is when I have to do this, but I need to accomplish X, Y, and Z before I get there, that I need to do this, and I need to do this, and I need to do this, then the time actually flies. Because every single day, every single moment becomes important. Yaakov Avinu wasn't waiting 7 years to marry Rachel. Yaakov Avinu was working every day to make Rachel feel amazing, to make Rachel feel like someone incredibly valuable. And day by day by day, Yaakov Avinu's life was filled with purpose. And that's how it went, ki yomim achadim, like one day. That's why we count Sphira the way we count it. Because we're reminded that every day is important. We're not counting just to the end, just to day 50, just to the day that we got the Torah. Every single day is a day of preparation. Every single day is a day of importance. Every single day builds us as human beings, that makes us ready to receive the Torah. Today is one day. It's the day. It's the only day. Today is the second day. Today is the third day. Today is the fourth day from the Omer. Today is the fifth day. Every single day becomes valuable and important. And when every day is numbered and every day is valued, so then getting to the goal is important. But how I get to that goal is also critical. That's how to make time fly. When you feel like you're doing something purposeful and you're doing something meaningful, then time has a way of flying before us. Because everything I'm doing is purposeful. As we spoke yesterday, we talked about this concept of happiness. When you feel like you're not living with purpose and you're not living with meaning, time schleps. It goes slowly. But when you feel like everything is purposeful, it flies. That's why we count Sefira the way we do, to remind ourselves to make every day count. So the question becomes, why is it so important, though, that we feel good about ourselves? There's so much talk about feeling good about ourselves, about self-esteem, about my vision and my picture of myself being well-adjusted. Why is that really so critical? So I'm going to tell you an amazing pasuk in this week's Parsha. So we're told that this Parsha is all about Metzorah. It's all about leprosy. It's about leprosy on the body, leprosy on the house, it's leprosy on the clothes. And we're told that if in fact we find leprosy on the body, so then a person has to be sent outside. A person has to go to the Kohen. The Kohen has to look at him, and the Kohen has to decide as to whether or not it's leprosy. And then after the Kohen makes all of his assessments and decisions as to whether you have to be separated, you have to step outside the community, then you have to go. And the Torah tells us that you have to go outside of the community. You have to go michutz l'shalosh machanos. You have to go outside of 3 camps. You have to sit there. You have to, all the days that you're there, separated from the rest of the community, you have to dress in a way that is like a mourner. You have to practice, show ways of mourning, of avelus. Let your hair grow, and you have to rip your clothes. And if anybody comes near you, you have to tell them tame yikra. You have to say, I am tame. You can't come near me. Badad yeshev mechutz lamachane moshavo. You have to sit alone by yourself outside of the camp. Now remember, leprosy is not medical leprosy. This is biblical leprosy. This is more like a psoriasis. It's more like a sign on the skin that you've done something wrong. The crime that is committed that gets leprosy, our rabbis tell us, is lashon hara, is gossiping about another person. Gossip, we know, is true. It's not things that you tell about somebody that's not true. It's not going to get you leprosy. That'll probably get you killed. That's a much worse sin. That's called motzi shema. It's speaking bad about somebody. That's never acceptable. Here we're talking about where you're saying something that is positive. So, something that is true, but it is said in a negative way to give a negative impression about a person. But it is absolute true. You're not telling any facts that are not true. That is called lashon hara. That is gossiping. And the Torah tells us that you have to sit alone because you took this person and you ostracized him. You separated him from his community. Therefore, in order for you to do tshuva, you have to feel this. You have to feel how bad this is. You have to feel what ostracization means. You have to feel what separation means. And therefore, you get sent outside of the camp. But if you look carefully at Rashi says something amazing. Rashi says, "Badad yeshev," you have to sit alone. Shelo yiyu shar temeim yoshvim imo. That other impure people can't be with you. In other words, it's not that you go to a place called the place for the impure people, to some hotel called Hotel Impure, right? It's not going to, Tome Beach, right? It doesn't work that way. You go, and where you go, you are separated. There's nobody else there with you. Va'amu Rabbeinu, our rabbi said, Manishtana mishar temeim leshe badad. Why do you have to sit alone? If you touched the dead body, you became impure, and you had to separate yourself. You could go where other people are impure. You don't have to. You don't have to go through this. But here, you have to go through this experience of being totally alone. So Rashi says, similar to what I said, but with a knech. Hoil v'hu hivdil b'lashon hara. Since with his gossip he was mavdil, he separated. Bein ish li'ishto, bein ish li'eyu, between a man and his wife, and between a man and his friend. Af hu yibadel. He also has to separate. So the Pashtus, in the simplest way, we understand that Rashi is teaching us this principle that you have to go through the experience in order to be able to clean yourself from the experience. But look at the words of Rashi very carefully. Rashi says that with the words that you spoke of Lashon Hara, you separated a man from his wife and a man from his friend. Presumably, why did you separate him from his wife and from his friend? Because you spoke Lashon Hara about him to his wife, who no longer wants to be near him, to his friend, who no longer wants to be his friend. And because you separated him from the people that love him, so then you need to be separated. The only problem with that is, what's first prize when you speak Lashon Hara? First prize. I mean this in a negative way, of course, but first prize is when you tell over Lashon Hara about another person. Oh, that person is so awful. They did black. And then the other person you're telling it to looks at you and said, that's why you think they're a bad person? You don't even know the half of it. Let me tell you how bad a person they really are. And then you spur some juicier Lashon Hara coming back at you. That is like first prize. That's like winning the lotto. I don't mean that positively, but that's when a person's engaged in Lashon Hara, that vindicates them. You see, they really taka are. And it makes them on some level feel better about themselves. I was really right about them. My assessment of them was correct. Who are the last people in the world you're going to speak Lashon Hara to? You want to speak about Bob, right? Bill. Who's the last person you're going to go to? Bill's wife. Because when you go to Bill's wife and you say to her, hey, you should know how bad your husband, they're going to say, what are you talking? How you say it about my husband? My husband's a wonderful man. You don't even know him. You can't say things about him like that. The speaker of Lashon Hara is not going to succeed. He's going to be thrown cold water on him. You're going to go to a person's friend, his best friend, and you're going to say, I want to tell you Lashon Hara about your best friend. Don't tell me any Lashon Hara. I don't want to hear. I love the guy. The guy's a great guy. If you knew him, you'd think he was a great guy also. You don't know him. That's why you're saying these ridiculous things. Nobody would speak to a friend. Nobody would speak to a wife. That's not who you go tell Lashon Hara to. So what does Rashi mean when Rashi says that that now this man doesn't have a relationship with his wife and he doesn't have a relationship with his friend? Why not? They're not the victims of the Lashon Hara. You ever walk into a room and there's a bunch of people standing there, and as soon as you walk into the room, they get quiet, and you feel mamish, like they were talking about you, and it's embarrassing. You don't feel very comfortable. Imagine you find out that people at a SHABBOS table were talking about you, and somebody says, they were talking about you, but it was fine. It was good. It doesn't make you feel better. Oh, they were saying nice things about me. You don't want to know that people are talking about you. It hurts your sense of self when you know that there's stuff going on around about you. When a person finds out that people are speaking Lashon Hara about them, that destroys their sense of self. And when you have no vision of yourself, you can't have a relationship with a wife. You can't have a relationship with friends. Because if you don't feel good about you, then you have nothing to connect with others. If you don't love you, you can't imagine that others could love you also. What Rashi is telling us is that the man that spoke Lashon Hara, The crime wasn't that people believed him and thought bad about this man. The crime was that this man lost his sense of self because he knew that you were talking about him. And that drove a wedge between a man and his wife and between a man and his friend, because he felt terrible about himself. And that's why we take this speaker of Lashon Hara, we separate him so that he can feel what it's like to be separated, but we separate him completely from all the people that he loves, all the people he could potentially love, anybody else around him. And we tell him to warn people, don't talk to me. Tame yikra. I'm impure. Don't come near me. Because we want him to understand what it feels like to be a nothing, to lose your sense of self, to have no vision of who you are, no sense of esteem, no sense of self-pride. And that's why we punish him this way. Because without a sense of self, without a vision of who I am, it is difficult for me to exist in this world. And that's why it's so critical. It's so critical to make another person feel like $1 million, to make them feel valuable, for ourselves to feel valuable, to feel that everything we're doing has a value, every day has a value. Because unless we can see our own value, our own worth, it's very difficult for us to continue on day after day in a productive, growing kind of way. That is the message of tsaras, of leprosy. That when we speak Lashon Hara, the leprosy comes. The crime of Lashon Hara is that we have destroyed the value and self-worth of the person who we've spoken about. Needless to say that you've destroyed your own sense of self. Because you feel good when you speak Lashon Hara. You feel better, you feel vindicated, you feel strong. But it doesn't last, and it's not based on anything. And when it crashes, you come along with it. I think it's a valuable, important lesson to understand feeling good is critical to growth. And when we feel good and we feel productive and we feel positive and upwardly mobile, that's when we can accomplish the most. That's the message of Metzorah, and it's also the message of Sfiras Omer. Make yourself count, and make yourself count every single day, because then you'll be in a place to be able to receive and to be able to grow with the Torah. My thoughts, everybody should have a beautiful, amazing, wonderful day, Chag Sameach, and a beautiful, wonderful, amazing Shabbos. And we'll see you all happily next Sunday morning.
תודה, חג שמח.
Chag Sameach. Have a great day, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.